And the problem with RK, and we still see patients who have had RK, and they're coming for cataract surgery, the radiokeratotomy cuts never stopped correcting. They got flatter and flatter and flatter. So you made this correction, 5 years later it was still moving. So it created these long-term issues with eyes, and typically they were all overcorrected. Most of them ended up overcorrected. It also structurally weakened your cornea. So if you actually had an eye trauma, your cornea would potentially rupture. And so we operate on patients like that, and it's a nightmare in terms of calculating their lens powers because you've changed their eye. There are also difficulties with figuring out lens power in a patient who has had PRK or LASIK. When we do cataract surgery on them, is a little more challenging in terms of their lens outcomes. But PRK started with doing laser reshaping of the eye. The difference between PRK, which was the precursor of LASIK, and LASIK is, LASIK was allowed a much more rapid recovery. So PRK, what you do is you basically essentially scrape off the entire surface of the cornea, creating a large abrasion. Then you would laser the cornea down to whatever the power was using the excimer laser. It's fascinating and very, very accurate. And then what you'd have to do is go through a healing phase where the cornea would have to re-heal. So the abrasion would essentially have to heal. And it was a painful procedure, and it took about a week for the cornea to re-heal, and there were some changes. You have to watch for scarring and haziness and other things. But a really remarkable procedure. Someone came up with the idea that, well, why don't we just make a flap in the cornea, lift it up, do the laser underneath, and put the cornea flap back down. Then you just have a very, very small abrasion that's very linear and very well designed and done, and it just heals within 24 hours, and these patients are up and about, and it's a miracle.
Yeah.
It's a great procedure. The downside to LASIK is the cornea is structurally weakened permanently, so if someone hit your eye traumatically, you could, in fact, 10, 15, 20 years later, dislocate the flap. It's never completely back and healed where it couldn't still be lifted years later. The other issue is, and the part that makes refractive surgery difficult, is if you do this procedure in a 25-year-old, what we know is the natural lens in your eye is growing through your entire life.
That's my next question.
So it's a moving target. Essentially, your eye is never going to be the same from 25 to 35 to 45. Now, hopefully, as I said, when you hit your 40s, you're going to lose the strength of focusing. So your lens is going through these changes throughout your life. And what you hope is if you do LASIK on a 25-year-old, they'll at least get to the age of 40 or 45 before they need to wear glasses. But eventually, they're all going to be in glasses. And a lot of times what happens is these patients who had LASIK in their 30s, when they're in their 40s, they not only need reading glasses, but their distance vision isn't quite as clear because their natural lens, it's almost like an onion. It grows a new layer every year. So your lens grows throughout your life. Eventually it grows big enough and thick enough that it's cloudy, and we call it a cataract. So therein lies some of the issues with fixing the eye at an earlier age with refractive surgery. It doesn't last forever. It has an expiration on it.
Yeah, I asked that in particular because I know that the lens in the eye changes. Mm-hmm. And when you make a correction at a certain age, it may not be right later on. So
right. If
someone is thinking of LASIK, should they be 30 or more, 40 or more?
Well, 40 or more, I would tell them to run in the other direction.
Okay.
I see a lot of patients who are in their 50s or 40s and 50s and had LASIK, and while they got a period of time out of it, they may have said it's the greatest thing I've ever done. At some point, that expires, and then they say, I had LASIK, it only lasted this long. And then when you deal with cataract surgery after LASIK, again, there are challenges. The ultimate irony is the patients who typically have LASIK or refractive surgery are those who least want to wear glasses. That's why they did it. They want to be out of glasses or contacts. They're the most likely to be in glasses or contacts after cataract surgery because the accuracy of what we do is affected by that. And it's not an exact science anyway, and we don't do cataract surgery to get people out of glasses particularly, but a lot of our patients function very well without glasses or with reduced glasses dependence as a function of the cataract surgery itself.
You mentioned earlier about doing cataract surgery on people in their 40s. What is the average age that someone would show up needing cataract surgery?
I would say typically 60s, 70s
Okay.
is when it really starts to manifest itself in terms of its effect on your driving at night and those things. But I've had patients in their 50s with very dense cataracts, and I have patients in their 90s who still don't need surgery.
Sure.
And it's really, it's just a matter of genetics and aging and health. And
I'm just trying to get to the viewer a sense of, gee, I'm this old, I should start to pay more attention.
If you're in your 60s, you have cataracts. If you're in your 50s, you have the start of cataracts. It's just a question of how much is it affecting your lifestyle.
Okay.
A lot of people don't realize what they're not seeing. They have their cataract out and they say, I can't believe the paint on my house is this color. I thought it was that.
Okay, that's a good example. A while back, I saw that a laser had been used to reattach a detached retina. Can you talk about that at all?
So a detached retina, as I said, we talked about the film in the back of your eye is the retina. If that film comes off the back of the eye, it's basically pushed up against the wall of your eye. And there are things that can cause a retinal detachment. Typically, the back of your eye is filled with a gel called vitreous. That gel fills the eye and it has nutrients and other components to it. But as we get older, that vitreous gel starts to become more liquid. And as it becomes more liquid, eventually you'll get a little fluid that'll reach behind it and it'll cause a separation of the vitreous gel from the retina. When that vitreous gel separates, usually we'll see patients who will complain of flashing lights and some floaters. The flashing lights are troublesome because what that is tension or pulling on the retina. And in some patients, that retina is very, very thin and very fragile, particularly patients who are very nearsighted. Their retinas are very thin to begin with. So as that vitreous gel pulls on the retina and separates as a normal consequence of aging, it can cause a hole or a tear in the retina. Now, statistically, I can't tell you exactly, but usually I'll tell patients about 1% of vitreous detachments will result in a hole or a tear in the retina. And that'll be the symptoms, sometimes flashing lights, sometimes floaters, sometimes a lot of floaters. When that happens, about 1% of those will end up leading to a retinal detachment. It's very important that we diagnose patients with the flashing lights and floaters, have them come in and look at them. Because if they do have a hole or a tear at that point, we can treat that sometimes very easily with a laser. It's almost like spot welding. So you treat around that area and it causes a scar to develop and walls off that little retinal tear or hole from keeping the fluid from getting underneath and cleaving off the rest of the retina. If you get a retinal detachment completely, you really can't treat that with laser. You would treat the hole and the area around it with either laser or what we call cryo, which is a freezing, and it causes a scar. But once a retina fully detaches, you have to put it back. And that can be with what we call vitrectomy, where you take out all the gel and push the retina back up against the eye, either with a gas bubble or some other technique. And sometimes you have to do what's called a scleral buckle, where you actually have to squeeze the eye and put a band around the eye to actually allow that retina to touch up against the eye and reattach. So it's a pretty serious condition that can most of the time be prevented if we get the patients to come in when they're having the flashing lights and floaters.
Okay. Well, this leads me to my next question, which you have partially already answered, about in medicine, new diagnostics and methods, treatments, procedures, and so on are developed all the time. How do you keep up with those changes? What is your own action? Do you go to meetings?
Yeah.
Do you attend courses?
It's a constant learning throughout your life. I mean, if I looked at the way that I first learned cataract surgery versus now, it's vastly different. The different lenses that we use, the different techniques that we can use. Medicine is an ever-evolving specialty. I will tell you that after being in practice for 20 years and being a doctor since 1994, I got my MD degree, there are certain things that you tend not to keep up with. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, because you specialize and you become more and more apt to do certain things that you're very, very good at. And some of the other things, some of the newer things that may come out, I may defer that to my younger associates who are just coming out of training, who have trained in those particular things. It's a lifetime of learning, but at some point you start to parcel off the things that you're going to spend your time learning and becoming and staying an expert at. Some of those other things, your patients are better off seeing somebody who is specializing in that particular thing. And we've gotten more and more specialized. So things that I used to do a lot of in terms of glaucoma surgeries when I first came out, I was adept at doing a lot of retinal procedures. Now I have a partner who does retina. And so I don't do a lot of the things that I used to do. And, again, you start to become a little more specialized as you get into your career, and you pick the things that you have an affinity for them, and also the things that you're best at. And the things that you don't enjoy doing as much, where maybe, that's what makes the world go around. We have a practice here of 7 doctors. We all have different things that we really tend to gravitate towards and that we like. And so, typically if you like something, you're going to be better at it, and your patients are going to be better served seeing those particular specialists. And that's kind of the way we've done it as we evolve. But staying current, I had board certification. Every 10 years I have to be re-board certified, so I have to meet certain criteria. I have to have a certain number of hours of clinical, continuing education. I have to have, we have to show certain things in our practice, and we have to do different studies to meet those criteria to show that we're staying current in what we're doing. And at some point when it becomes no longer interesting for me or important for me, then it'll be time for me to move on to something else.
Okay. Well, I want to thank you very much for helping us get the message out about ophthalmology.
Sure.
And the issues that people should be aware of. And I hope you could be available for an update in the future.
Always.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
This is Mike Bass for Targeting Your Health. That's it. Now,
Good.
I can ask you, we've talked a lot about